Welcome to the Performance Enhancing Podcast. It's like steroids for your brain. A podcast for people looking to live life at their peak potential, chock full of real-world tools and knowledge that you can apply in your life today. By providing you with a lens into the lives, beliefs, practices, and actions of those who are already living extraordinary lives, the Performance Enhancing Podcast will help you shift your mindset or create that change in your daily rituals and habits so you can explode with success in the areas of life that are most important to you. So get ready for another dose of Performance Enhancing Podcast with SatoriPrime. Here's your host, Ilan Ferdman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Performance Enhancing Podcast with your host, Ilan Ferdman. Now, we're going to cover a topic today that we've actually never covered. I mean, there's aspects of it that we've probably covered in other ones, but we've never covered this. It's how to master negotiations. And I brought on an expert who I actually heard on a friend of mine's podcast and reached out to him immediately to get this gentleman on the line with us. His name is Alex Kouts. And he's a coach, he's a consultant, he's an entrepreneur, he's created a bunch of companies on his own, but he pretty much coaches and trains people on many things. But one of his areas of mastery is negotiation. So we're going to talk about things like how to ask for a raise, distinction that he gave, which I thought was amazing, called the fuck you price. You're definitely going to want to hang on to hear what that's all about. Keys to negotiation, one of them, and we'll talk a lot about this, is being willing to walk away from the deal and what you have to do prior to ever walking into a negotiation, which he calls pre-work, things like knowing your opponent. And then we actually end this part talking about relationships as capital. And I know we've kind of delved into that, but Alex has a very, very unique perspective on what that entails. One of the most informative podcasts and interviews I've done. Alex is truly, truly a master, and I think you guys all will absolutely enjoy this tremendously. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm super excited for our guest here today, and in full disclosure, I actually hunted him down. I heard him on a podcast of a friend of mine, Jordan, which you guys know from The Art of Charm, and immediately contacted Jordan and was like, I got to get Alex on the show. So I have with us today, Alex Kouts. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, man.
Yeah. So the reason I actually had Alex on here, he's been on Jordan's podcast twice, and for very good reason. He is well-versed on many topics. We're going to probably start with negotiations, which is something that I know a lot of people would love to hear about. The one that I actually heard Alex talk about first was public speaking. So we'll see how much we can cover today. But Alex, before we dive into all of that and you sharing your mastery in those areas, can you tell people a little bit about your story, your why, so they get related to you a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So basically, I've been kind of a startup guy my entire career. And the benefit of being stuck in tech startups, especially in the Silicon Valley area where I work, is that you have to figure out how to do a lot of things on your own very quickly and very cheaply. So, and also you're at a very young age given the ability to kind of screw up and try a lot of different things very fast. So if you have an opportunity to do it, I highly recommend working in a startup. But so anyway, as a result of that, as kind of a result of building a couple digital businesses over the years, I learned a lot of skills that I started teaching on the side for fun. So I'm not a professional teacher and coach full time. I'm a professional working in tech startups, and I've used a lot of the things that I teach to kind of help people. I started teaching on the side on the weekends and at nights for fun, kind of startup related skills, business related skills about 5 or 6 years ago, and just really started enjoying it, and I've been doing more and more of it. And met Jordan through that, actually through one of my former students, and I've been kind of doing this stuff more and more and loving it. So that's me.
Interesting. I'm curious because most people either fall in the camp of I'm going to learn and teach right away. You obviously came from a different camp, which is I need to learn these things to run my business properly.
Yeah.
What inspired you to actually go out and teach?
So it's funny. I actually started a tech company of my own. But while I was kind of doing that, I got hooked up with a lot of other tech people in the Bay Area. And I had one friend that I met who was actually an advisor to my startup, who was starting a company and had a bunch of junior product managers. Product management is a function in many tech startups. And he's like, well, I have these baby PMs that really need help learning how to do their job. Would you kind of run a course? And I was like, oh yeah, this will be fun. So I kind of set up a classroom inside of the company, like set up desks and apples and the whole deal, and kind of created this course and taught them how to do their job. And one of them was a student at a startup school in San Francisco called General Assembly, where I now teach. It was like, after the full day of teaching, where I thought they'd probably be sick of hearing me, they were kind of energized, and they were like, you should teach this course. It'd be great. I'm sure other people would love to take it. So I fell into it by default, but just because it was kind of fun, and there's apparently a big demand for this type of teaching. So yeah.
There's a huge benefit, and you can maybe say something about this too, to those that teach. I actually know that in Montessori schools, for example, from young kids, the whole idea is that the older kids teach the younger kids. Because for me, also as a student and a teacher, I find that which I'm able to teach, I can truly say that I reach a different level of mastery. It's one thing to understand it, but it's another thing to teach it. Have you found that to be true?
Oh my gosh. I mean, you hit it on the head. That's one of the biggest benefits of teaching is you figure out what you know and you have to explain it to people. And what's better is you figure out what you don't know. And the other side is whenever you're about to commit a sin that you teach people not to commit, saying, we don't do this. And I'm like, oh my God, I was about to do something I teach people not to do. I always kind of catch myself and I'm like, oh, thank God. And if I didn't teach, there's no way I would burn this stuff into my mind. Because I have to verbalize it and I have to think about it and I have to burn it into my memory, and you can't get it any other way.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Now, just out of curiosity, and I'm sure people want to know, what kind of startups and what kind of companies have you started, and what kind of companies do you now work with?
Sure. Yeah. So I've done a number of different things. So I've been head of product at a number of startups, meaning head of kind of developing the product strategy and the features that you roll out and kind of managing that product through to execution and market launch. At a number of companies. I started a company of my own working with politics and technology. So the idea was to make politics and government interesting for people who don't care about politics and government. And that company was called Indigov. Indigovern.com is the URL. And as a result of that, I got hooked up with Sean Parker's startup called Brigade, which is a similar idea. Went to go work as director of product for them for a period of time before kind of breaking out again on my own. And now I'm probably going to start another company again, because once you start one company, you kind of get addicted to the pain of it and can't really consider doing anything else. And I'm doing a number of consulting, kind of freelance stuff for a number of Fortune 500 media companies. That's why I'm in LA right now, sunny LA, teaching them the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about today, in addition to a couple other cool topics related to digital product stuff.
Awesome. Amazing. Yeah. Alex, the thing that blew me away when I was listening to your podcast or interview, I should say, on Jordan's podcast was there's certain people that it sounds like they teach from reading a lot of books and doing a lot of research. And there's in my brain at least, a very clear difference between those that teach from experience, that they're going through it. They're not just experienced it once, but this is their life. They literally do this day in, day out, teaching, learning, etc. And that's why I reached out to you, because I just feel like you're a wealth of information. So with that being said, let's dive into negotiating. And I think one of the things that struck me most, and I think a lot of people will get the most value from, is negotiating salaries, which is something that you did quite a bit. And when we say quite a bit, Alex, how many times did you negotiate your salary?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I've had a lot of different companies where I've negotiated quite a bit, but there was one where I negotiated, I think it was 7 times in about 2 years, more than double my salary. So I've kind of got addicted to it. And I've developed this culture around me, the jobs I've been at, where, the executive structure just knows that I'm going to come in and negotiate pretty regularly.
Do they at some point when you walk into their office go, again, Alex, seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I had one boss that, every time I had a big win, I was doing business development at the time, meaning kind of negotiating large partnerships for the company I was working at. Every time I had a big win, I would just kind of go in and be like, you know what's up? And he'd be like, yeah, I know what's up. Figure out what it's going to take to get you back out that door.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So for those people, because I know that even for me back in the day, I was negotiating more equity plays and how much equity I was taking in the company, et cetera. And there was always very uncomfortable conversation. And I'm pretty comfortable being around people, asking for what I want, but I always felt like I had to sit in my room and just do like the pufferfish thing, just like, like get in there, get in there, get in there. So I'm sure people are terrified. So let's talk a little bit about that and how they can get around that and what are some do's and don'ts in that world.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crux of it. And the reality is like everybody is terrified of negotiating. It's just the way that it goes. And I've been doing it for years and years, and I teach it. I mean, I've taught hundreds and hundreds of people and spoken on podcasts about all kinds of stuff, and I still get scared every time I do it. Because there's this social construct that we all buy into that asking for something makes me presumptuous, and it's putting me in a situation where I don't belong. And people feel that way, like I don't belong. I should not be making this ask. It's too much. I'm going to burn a relationship. I'm being too aggressive. And especially women. Women are specifically worried about that kind of thing because that's what society tells us. But the reality is no great business has ever been built. No great venture has ever been launched without somebody deeply negotiating for the very finer points of the deal. It just happens all day, all around us. And if you can accept that you're not the only person in the conversation that's terrified, that the other person on the other side is terrified as well in a job or salary negotiation, then you can actually kind of leverage yourself or rationalize yourself into feeling better about it. And for everybody and pretty much every fear that you have, whether it's getting over some type of massive addiction, for a lot of people, the way to get over that kind of thing is a rationalization in your mind. Rationalizations and habit forming behavior. So if I can set up in my mind a reason why I shouldn't be upset about this negotiation, and I can go back to that over and over again in my mind, it can help me significantly. So I coach people to do that, and I have rationalizations of my own.
So let's give them an actual real world example, because people might hear those as terminologies and go, I have no idea what Alex is talking about. So can you give us an example?
Yeah. So first of all, I know this is not an after school special. Can I use bad language?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good. So
we encourage them.
Good. So whenever anybody extends me an offer for the first time, and I literally mean any time, if it's someone giving me, if I'm trying to buy a car and someone makes me an offer on the price, the salesman does, or I'm getting a job offer and someone gives me a first offer, my first reaction is always, always, always that first number is a fuck you price. Meaning whatever they think they can get me for, it's an insult. It's whatever the cheapest amount you think you can acquire whatever I'm selling for.
Interesting.
Like in a job offer scenario, the HR rep is not giving you the best offer they can possibly give you. They're offering you inside of the range, their allowable range that they can pay for that role, not the most they can give you, probably not the least they can give you. They're somewhere in the lower quartile, maybe the first or second quarter of what they can give you inside of that range. They're not trying to make you happy. They're trying to make themselves happy and get you in the door the cheapest amount possible. Same with a car. The guy's not trying to give you the best deal that he can possibly give you because he wants to make more money. And if you're going to give him a choice of make more money or make Alex a little bit happier, he's going to make more money every single day. So I know all of that. And every time I get that first offer, immediately a fuck you price. And that gives me permission to say, you know what? I need to defend myself against this number as opposed to I need to see what else I can get. Right. So I'm coming from a more empowered position because I know I can.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, I think what'll come up for certain people, especially around jobs. So my wife is an attorney, for example. So she's constantly in these, negotiating type situations.
Sure.
But I think what comes up for people is that if they overstep or refuse that first offer, in their brain, they're saying, well, there's at least 5 or other 6 candidates, most likely as qualified, maybe some even more qualified, that they'll just go, you know what? Great. Next.
Yep. It's certainly possible. And, you have to, at the end of the day, be comfortable being able to walk away from a job. I'll tell that to anybody. That means if you come in the door and you say, you know what? I can't leave. They have other options and I got to take whatever they give me. You've lost before you even entered. You're not really negotiating. You're asking them for a favor. It's not negotiation. Negotiation only exists when you feel comfortable enough to say, you know what? If it doesn't work out here, something else better is going to come around the corner. And I've done consulting where I've kind of walked people through. They've hired me to walk them through negotiations, both kind of simple and complex. And I'll tell you, the people that can't walk away do not negotiate. And a lot of times they'll hire me because they don't want to walk away and they're trying to figure out how to get more money out of the deal. But the truth is then I'm not really able to help them too much because if it's in that situation, again, no negotiation. So, you in your mind have to say, you know what? I am worth it. And if this company is not interested in me and it doesn't work out, then I will find something else. And if you can't come to that, then take whatever they give you. Try and ask, but it's not really going to be that interesting, unfortunately.
Interesting. So let's assume that someone does not have a plan B, right? And they've been out of work for 8 months, for example. So now the problem that I see in this is that they're emotionally vested. They are just needy. It's almost like when you approach that person at the bar and you're needy and no one likes to be with the needy person.
Right.
It could be the best looking person in the room. You're like, I don't know, that just feels gross. Any tips for those people that are kind of there to get around that emotional neediness?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so in a situation where you're negotiating and you have no leverage versus a situation where you do have a lot of leverage, with a job negotiation scenario, it's really not going to be that much different as far as how you would play it. The only difference is like what you would be willing to take and where your lines are going to be. But the way you would proceed would basically be the same thing, which is kind of using all the tactics that I kind of lay out in the course that I teach in SF, which we can certainly talk about today. But it doesn't really change. And the only thing I would say is like, I don't pretend to know everybody's financial position, and I absolutely don't think that everybody can afford to walk away all the time. Sometimes you just can, and I've been in situations where I can't. So you play it as tight as you possibly can, but at the end of the day, you take what you can get, and that's just the reality of life. But I mean, I'm also the kind of person who is, American confident enough, and specifically America's brand of confidence enough to say, if this isn't exactly what I want, I will find what I want later. But, if you have kids looking at you to feed them and put a roof over their head, the world looks very different.
Yeah, absolutely. But I agree that it is a game, and there's a player on the other side who will read how you're playing that game.
Oh, yeah.
And if they believe that they can sell you on the fuck you price, then that's what they're going to stick their guns to, because they know that you're going to buckle before them. Yep. Have you ever been in a situation where you maybe pushed too hard and walked away and then realized, you know what, I kind of maybe overdid it that time, and then somehow got back in there? Or you just walk away and you walk away?
Yeah, I mean, I've done this. I've negotiated for so many things. There's situations in which I've screwed up every possible way you could even imagine. That's certainly done things like that. But that's where you figure out where the line is, right? I mean, you have to do that. And so I paid a good chunk of my grad school tuition playing poker. I've been a big poker player my entire life. And one thing I learned from very good poker players is if you play a hand and you lose, but you played it okay, you cannot feel bad about it. You have to train yourself not to feel bad at all. Because in reality, it's a numbers game. You're going to negotiate a lot of things. You're going to play a lot of hands. And if you play them right, most of the time, you're going to win more than you're going to lose. You're going to come out on top. But you're not going to come out on top in every single scenario. That's just life. That's just poker. That's just negotiation. So yeah, I mean, there's situations where I've negotiated business contracts and I've asked for too much. And I've insulted the other side of the party to the point where, negotiation wasn't even possible because you priced yourself out of their territory. And those are mistakes that I made quite early on in my career. I learned how to not make them later on by kind of playing around with what I think acceptable ranges are by reading the other side of the table and doing my pre-work before negotiation, meaning learning as much as I possibly can about somebody before I walk into that conversation. The chances that you're going to insult somebody are much, much higher if you don't understand them. So taking a lot of time and investing, understanding the other side is the hallmark of someone who's very, very good at negotiation.
And I think that goes to, and that's really where I want to take this conversation next, but I think that goes to giving people the confidence and that emotional stability to know that they're playing within that range so that they can't really screw this up and they don't have to walk away from the table. So what are some of those guidelines that people can use when they're going in to negotiate, well, I guess anything in this particular case?
Yeah, so let's start off with kind of the pre-work side of things. So when I teach my courses in the city here or in San Francisco, and I've taught them in a number of cities now, but whenever I teach them, I always tell people like the most important part of negotiating is number one, empathy, and number two, pre-work. And pre-work in a sense is kind of structured empathy and writing things down. But effectively in that situation, so let's say I want to walk into negotiate a business deal at a company, me personally. I can guarantee you the person I'm meeting with, I know every single thing about them that is publicly available before I go into the meeting. I know exactly what they look like. I know where they've gone to school. If they have a public Facebook profile, I've gone to it. I've learned every single thing about them. And there's nothing about that is creepy or stalkerish at all. You cannot hope to have a productive conversation with someone until you know them. And that doesn't mean I walk into a meeting and I'm like, hey, how's it going, TJ? I know you went to Ohio State and you remember this fraternity. I'm like, I would never do that because that's creepy as hell. You go in and you start a conversation and you meet the person, you get to know them, you act like a human being, and then later you can steer the conversation in areas that you know you're going to have something in common, right? So if they're like a Skins fan and I'm also a Redskins fan from DC, I'm going to talk to them about football. I'm going to talk to them about RFK and the good old days and all the things that we used to know, right? So again, knowing the other side of the table helps you understand where their tolerances are, where their personality is, the type of person that they are. And again, today, in this online environment we live, you can find out so much about somebody without ever meeting them. It's insane. You have no excuse not to know them very well before you actually talk to them. So that's number one, figure out where they are. Then the type of negotiation you have or making, there's a lot of general rules of thumb. So if I'm going into a salary negotiation, generally I coach people to not ask for more than 10 to 15% above what they're initially offered. Because for most companies, the allowable range is going to fall somewhere in that neighborhood. That there's around like a 15, 17% range inside of which like an offer is given. So if my offer is $100,000, they maybe have around 112 or 115 is like their absolute max for that position. That's the general formula that most companies use. So if I go in and I say, no, and I'm going to ask for 40% and hope to come in at like 15 or 20, I may price myself out of that job, and they may say, there's no way we're going to reach a number that's going to make this guy happy. We don't want him coming in the door resentful. We're going to step off the negotiation now. So, the art of negotiating and doing this a lot of times is figuring out where that limit is and the different types of negotiations you're doing. Jobs, very, very easy, right? A job offer, because it's pretty much the same for everybody. I've negotiated offers for, I don't know, north of 50, 75 people, and it's all pretty much the same every time. There's not really a big difference.
And I think you could do research in most environments or most work types about what competitors are paying people in and around your position doing similar work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Glassdoor.com is a great place to get kind of relational data.
What was that one again?
If you're Glassdoor.com, I believe.
Okay.
I think you can look at posted salaries of similar positions. I use Quora a lot if you're in kind of a tech or startup related place, because a lot of people will ask questions about salary and answers will be posted. But there's so many publicly available salary reports done by job seeking organizations that make it their business to help people find jobs that, you should probably have a pretty good range understanding, like walking in the door.
Okay. Anything else that you would do in that pre-work phase?
Yeah. So, another good thing as well is there's a whole kind of pre-worksheet that I make available to people. But basically what that shows is, I'm going to walk into before I walk into this negotiation, I need to understand some basic things, right? I need to understand who the parties involved are, meaning who am I talking to, what's important to them, all that kind of good stuff. Then I want to walk through what issues I want to discuss. So if it's a job negotiation, I want to walk through, base salary, maybe, stock options, maybe vacation time or start date or bonus or something like that. I need to be prepared to talk about every single one. You'd be surprised how many times people walk into negotiation and then they get completely thrown off by a basic question they should have had the answer to. So they thought all their time about the base salary, but they haven't thought about signing bonus. They haven't thought about start dates. So when they're asked a flat question, they end up giving up more than they want to because they just aren't ready to have the conversation. So, I recommend to people that I help out with this kind of stuff, like actually write this down on a sheet of paper the first couple times you do it. I don't write it down personally anymore before I walk into a negotiation, but I guarantee when you're starting, you definitely should. Also, you want to write down or be very explicit about what your interests are and what their interests are. So if I'm doing a business development deal, the person I'm negotiating, the business development representative, let's say in a large company like a Fortune 500 company or even a mid 200 person company, that BD associate that I'm negotiating salary with most likely isn't the person who's going to be signing off on the deal. Their job is to say, go out, find that deal, negotiate it, and then bring it up to the company, socialize it up the executive chain, have them okay it or not okay it, and then the deal goes through or not. So that's very important for me to know. If I'm negotiating with a BD person who doesn't have the authority to make the deal, I can only go so far. and they need to sell it up the chain. So whatever I ask for, that person has to be able to sell internally. So I have to position my ask in a way that they could sell it so that their executive could look at it and say, this is a good deal for us. So it's all messaging, it's all understanding. Another really important thing to know is what your resistance point is. So let's say I get a job offer. The job offer is coming in, and I know if it's less than $75,000, I will not take it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people aren't explicit about where their resistance point is or where their floor is. And as a result, they take less than they're comfortable with. They take the job and they're resentful and they're miserable. The truth is you need to know what that is going in and not compromise it at all. I am worth this amount of money. I will not take a job for less. When you don't write your principles down and you don't know it, your principles don't exist when you get to a situation where you're stressed. So make sure you write it down. The other one that is really important is your BATNA, which is a term that's used, or an acronym that's very frequently used in texts on negotiation, which is best alternative to negotiated agreement. So this is to the conversation you and I had before. If I get a job offer, and I don't feel like I can walk away, I have no alternative.
Yeah.
But if I do, and like my alternative is, you know what, if I don't get a job here, I'm going to go back out and there's another company I've been looking at. I think it's possible. That's my alternative. Even if I don't have an offer for them, that's my alternative. And when I write down my best alternative to negotiated agreement, or my BATNA, I have that front of mind. It's a psychological thing. You're hacking your own mind, because now I know that there's somewhere else for me to go. If I don't, again, I'm not negotiating. I'm taking pretty much whatever they give me, and I'm asking for favors for a better offer. So write that down if you can. And lastly, I mean, the thing you want to think about, and this is less important with job offer scenarios because they tend to be pretty quick, but it's the communication channel that you're using. So if I use email, if I'm using phone, if I'm using one-on-one interviews, that also changes my timeline for how I communicate and who and how I communicate to and with. So if I'm talking via phone, let's say, for instance, I have a job interview in DC and I live in San Francisco. If I'm able to do those interviews via phone, it may make me a lot less impactful because my physical presence could be more impressive, right? I can impress them with my passion for what they're doing. But if I can't do it and I have to do it via the phone, then I'm removed a little bit, right? Then I have to work a little bit harder. Maybe I have to send more follow-up emails or send better references or something. But how you communicate and when you communicate makes big differences for the types of things you need to do to compensate. So I'd say if you can't do one-on-one interviews at a company, be really aggressive with email, be really aggressive following up and showing your interest constantly, because you have to compensate.
Interesting. You actually remind me of a funny story, or like a rule of thumb that I had about writing things down. I remember in college, you go out and you get drunk and girls start looking better than they did when you walked in. So I made this rule that I would walk in and just like scan the room and pick while I was sober, the girls that I would potentially be interested that night. And I would never stray from that. That was like, that was my floor. So it's just really good. It's just really good though to have that in mind, because whatever the situation you're walking into, it is a stress situation for every human being. And in a stressful situation, you're going to make a stupid mistake, just like you are when you're inebriated. So it just made me realize that. And I thought that was a really good point. Yeah. I did have a follow-up question. When you said you were talking about when you were negotiating with business development people and they had to sell it internally. So would you negotiate the deal fully with the BD, or are you negotiating in a sense to get it up the hierarchy, knowing that you're going to continue the negotiation with the executive?
It's a great question. So it's a very complex one, and quite frankly, a lot of junior BD people who haven't been doing their job wrong will make the wrong call in a situation almost 9 times out of 10. And I'll explain that in a second. But when you are negotiating a complex deal with a company, you have to be extremely, extremely conscientious of company hierarchy and relationships. So if I'm talking to this guy and I'm developing a relationship with him, and we're beginning, we could be talking every day. For a complex negotiation, it could last 8 months. You could talk with these people every day. Wow. I've done these kind of things before. In that situation, if I go over that guy's head to his boss, even if he knows it, right? Or if he senses that like my goal is to go past him and up the chain over his head, that immediately destroys the relationship. I cannot do that. what you want to do, the most important thing you can do is find someone in that organization that has sway, and maybe it's the guy you're talking to or girl or whatever, has sway, and make them your champion. Develop a relationship with them to the point where they like you, you are top of mind, and they want to help you get a deal done because they feel like you're a champion for them as well. So, great example. I did a deal when I was working at a startup to get our application placed in marketplaces for large carriers and OEMs. So Google, Verizon, AT&T, companies like that. Because for a mobile app developer, if your app is very high up in the placement for the store, it's most likely to get downloaded and you're going to make more money and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So deals to get placement in those stores existed with those large companies. So I had times where I would develop relationships well before I actually had a need to use them. So one of my favorite tricks in BD is I would call up these guys and I'd be like, hey, I'm going to be in your city, week after next, having a couple meetings. Let's grab coffee. Truly, I was never going to be in that city. I just wanted to make it less pressure for them to have a meeting with me in person. Because if I say, hey, I'm going to fly halfway across the country to have coffee with you, they're going to be like, no, that's creepy. It's just like a dating thing. If I went up to a girl and I was like, I'm going to fly across the country to have coffee, she'd be like, no, you're a stalker. That's creepy.
Yeah.
Why do you need to have coffee with me so badly, right? But in reality, I want to generate an in-person relationship with that person, right? It's got to be in person. So back to your original question, I spend a lot of time generating a relationship with that person. And if I skip over them, it destroys the relationship. Or if they feel I'm not in it for them, if I'm in it to get to someone else, like I'm sleeping with you to get to somebody else, can't have a real relationship.
Yeah.
So it's very important to be empathetic and focus on the person. Junior BD people are always trying to hopscotch up the corporate chain of who they're negotiating with, and they destroy relationships left and right trying to do that.
Interesting. So once that happens, I'm clear that you're going to want to work on the relationship and keep that kosher. But at that point, you can't, according to what you're saying, you can't get to the exec and know that now his threshold for negotiation is X. So now you're going to restart the process. You just kind of work with what you've been doing the whole time?
Well, so that's a good question. So no, I would say you want to concentrate on making that person you're talking to a champion for you inside the organization, right? You want to feel really confident they are selling you up the chain internally. Because quite frankly, unless you have some revolutionary, innovative technology that no one's ever heard of before and that people are really excited to hear from you about personally, there's more credibility in your message coming from someone who's trusted inside the company up the chain than from you. But that doesn't mean that I don't make every effort to kind of get socialized inside of the organization and meet every single person I can. Absolutely do. I want to meet their boss. I want to meet that executive. I want to meet the people they work with. I want to meet the other partners they sign deal with that are similar to me. I want to meet everybody. But that doesn't mean that I'm sending messages directly to the executive, circumventing the person that I'm working with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very important to get socialized in the organization, but you don't want to cut people off.
Okay. Any tips on doing that? Because I think you brought up a really good point, but it also speaks to the point of you being kind of this long-term future thinker. You were running this company and you knew that at some point you're going to need a relationship with BDs, even though there's no relation, you didn't need them now, and you're already putting that kind of work, which for, a lot of people just don't think that way. They're like, okay, I need to produce X. So here, I spoke to someone else the other day about launching on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and things like that. And one of the things they shared also was the 6-month process of contacting editors and publishers and bloggers before they ever posted a Kickstarter, before they even had a product, to build those relationships and add good value and goodwill to those people, which I think is genius. And I think it's just something people don't think about. So I just want to make sure that people start thinking longer term. I think that's a great point. But personally, I know you're really great at this socializing and networking and kind of meeting people. What are some things that you do that you found have been really successful in doing that?
Yeah. So before I answer that, let me go back to your previous point of it's generating relationships without an immediate need. So one thing that you and all of your listeners and everybody has to internalize is that, and I've seen this many, many times around, relationships are capital. I don't mean that. They're not just people they are specifically money in the bank. Every single person everybody in the world that you meet has some valuable relationship that they have in their in their sphere of influence that will at some point in your life be valuable to you. You may or may not hear about it when you need it, but every relationship is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's number one. The second part is, now that you know that, let's say you accept that, right? The relationship's the most important thing that I can develop in my life because they just are. Every successful person I know, relationships drive everything. And by the way, the more successful you get, the easier it is for you to generate relationships and the easier it is for you to get outlandish things done, but it all comes back to relationships. Positional authority makes it easier, but it's all relationships. So now that I know that relationships are important, let's just assume that we buy that, right? Well, I certainly do. I've built my entire career off it. Let's assume that we know that. Now what? Well, can I go out and say, I need to develop relationships with people for the sake of having them because they're valued to me later? No, that's the paradox of it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You can't go and try and generate real meaningful relationships with people saying, I'm doing this because I'm going to cash this chip in later. It just doesn't work like that. You have to genuinely be interested in other people. You have to be humble enough to say, everybody has something to teach me. Everybody has something that I can contribute to them, and we can form a mutually agreeable partnership. And not only that, I find them interesting, and maybe I want to be friends with them or do fun stuff and have great experiences. You just have to do it that way. You have to come into it with your eyes kind of wide open, a little bit childlike. As far as things that are very good, to actually generate relationships, I would say,
it's cliffhanger time. Yeah. So we'll end it right there, and we'll talk about some of the tips that Alex uses to build these relationships as capital, not from a place of using people, but actually from a place of getting value and being able to give value. So I hope you've really enjoyed this part one of my interview with Alex. Make sure you come back in a few days and check out part two. And until we speak again, have an amazing, amazing day, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this week's Performance Enhancing Podcast. We've taken this pep talk and created a custom action guide so you know exactly what action steps to take now to grow your business. Just head over to SatoriPrime.com/podcast and download it for free. Also, please leave a comment and rate this podcast on iTunes. It'll help us get the word out. Thanks for listening. Now, go and implement. We'll see you next time.
Did you run through doors till you hit the